Our ultimate rankings for week 2 are here. Make sure you drop a like and make sure you subscribe if you enjoy the ultimate rankings format. But let's get into running back rankings first. And we'll start here with the S tier. 2 guys in the S tier for us this week. Our running back one, believe it or not, because Nathan has Christian McCaffrey ranked a little bit lower than normal. So combined, our running back one is Saquon Barkley, which I don't feel like this is that hot of a take. We have Saquon and Christian McCaffrey in the same tier here. And I will say this. If Christian McCaffrey plays, right?
If he doesn't, Jordan Mason, bump him down a tier, you're still starting him.
And
right?
so, yeah. And so with McCaffrey, assuming he plays, he is an absolute must start, and he is going to be one of the most productive running backs in the league, period. In that system, I don't think anybody's going to argue that, but it was worth noting that this is assuming that he plays, and if he doesn't, Jordan Mason gets a pretty significant bump, and he ends up in somewhere in the high-end running back 2 range. I mean, Jordan Mason had a pretty good showing against the Jets on Monday Night Football. So Saquon obviously came out, had 3 touchdowns. He's playing on the best offense he's ever played on. And so with that being said, I think he's deserving of this rank as well. Let's go to the A tier.
Yeah, so the A tier is going to be a big tier here this week because I honestly think every single one of these guys has the upside to be a top 3 running back. You got Breece Hall, Bijan, JT, Achane, Kyron, Gibbs, and Joe Mixon is going to be in this tier as well. I want to highlight him specifically because the dude had 30 carries last week and dominated against a pretty stout run defense in the Indianapolis Colts. Now, could that have been a fluke? Potentially, from a volume perspective, do I think he's going to get 30 touches again in week 2? Probably not, but 20 to 25, I think it's absolutely possible and absolutely feasible. I think at this point, you're looking at Joe Mixon potentially being one of the better values at the running back position when you're looking at his pre-draft or preseason price. And any other guys here, honestly, Achane, I think even though Achane is the only guy in this range other than Gibbs that's splitting carries with some other running backs in that backfield, they're just too explosive, too good to not have in this tier pretty much every single week unless there's some like crazy tough matchup or injury, obviously. But Joe Mixon, really the star of the show in this tier in week 2. We have high expectations for him.
Yeah, and let's drop down to the B tier here. And again, we're not going to talk about every player in these. We're just going to highlight some of the ones that we're a little bit higher or lower on. Obviously, James Conner ends up in this tier at rank number 11. He is a dude that we think, while he's on the field, is going to be very productive, and he showed that in week 1. Derrick Henry's in this tier. Kenneth Walker gets a pretty significant bump. He got most of the work that he could handle in week 1, and we expect him to be pretty productive, honestly, if he is catching passes, if he is, scoring touchdowns, which he had a touchdown that got called back because of holding. He was a touchdown away from really being a mid to high-end running back 1 in week 1. And so with that being said, he's going to get a nice bump here. James Cook has a pretty good matchup where the Vegas line is going to be pretty high there, so we like him this week a lot. And then you've got Josh Jacobs, who has moved down for us quite a bit. So with Jacobs, again, the Love injury does hurt him. He is going to be lower in our rankings until Jordan Love does come back. And probably, him and Isaiah Pacheco are back-to-back. I'd probably put Pacheco over him, actually. And I think I did. I think Nathan and I have him flip-flopped, so that's why.
Yeah.
But with that being said, Pacheco, Kamara, Pacheco and Kamara round out this tier. And honestly, this tier you're feeling okay about starting all these running backs right now. And, it's kind of sorting through, okay, who from the dead zone was good and bad. And we're finding that out as we go into week 2.
The C tier, we've got a bunch of alpha top running backs that just have less friendly matchups or have lower ceilings overall. And I do want to highlight Tony Pollard here, who we do have ranked much higher than is going to be consensus and what he's projected on a lot of your fantasy platforms. But with Tony Pollard, the reason we're so high on him this week is he is playing the New York Jets, which has a really good secondary, and you're going to see this reflected in our wide receiver rankings. We don't have super high expectations for the second straight week with Will Levis as a passer and Calvin Ridley and DeAndre Hopkins in the receiving game. So that really leaves Tony Pollard, who clearly showed that he is going to be the number 1 guy over Tyjae Spears, at least for the foreseeable future. And I think he's going to have another really good week. You saw Jordan Mason do really well against that run defense on Monday night, and Deebo Samuel being lined up in the backfield doing his thing as well. Tony Pollard isn't either of those guys, but he is very, very consistent when he is on the field and is going to get consistent volume as well. So excited to see what he can do in what is probably going to be a low-scoring game.
In the D tier, there are 3 guys in this tier. Najee obviously didn't do a whole lot last week. B-Rob is a guy I want to highlight here because he actually had a fairly good week, and he wasn't efficient. He only got 12 carries, but he did have 3 receptions for 50 yards, and he had a touchdown on the ground, so he ended up with 18 points last week. Yeah. And he's playing the Giants this week, and so the matchup is also good. He was somebody that was able to have a touchdown touchdown and finishes a running back 2 in week 1. So we have him ranked at running back 23 here. He finishes the running back 21.
And Eckler was a non-factor.
And Eckler, I mean, Eckler got some work, but with that being said, I mean, it was mostly receiving game work, right?
Yeah.
Because he had 2 attempts for 10 yards, so that was it. But he did have the same amount of targets as Brian Robinson, and he had 52 yards. It's
non-factor in the rushing game.
And the fact of the matter is, what we're looking for here with these Commanders running backs is the touchdown upside, and it looks like it's going to go to Brian Robinson. So with that being said, and then Monty has a good matchup this week as well. He's always going to be a pretty good start for us, and a guy that is, I mean, and just a kind of, we had him ranked high last week too. He had 16.5 points. He ended up being the running back 17 overall last week. We were ranking him pretty conservatively here, but he had 17 attempts last week for 90 yards and a touchdown. And so these are all guys down here that I'm still comfortable flexing because they showed in week 1 that they can get the volume to produce.
Yep, and in the F tier here, we've got a bunch of warm bodies getting carries, with the exception of DeAndre Swift, right, who's a big name, but he looked really bad last week. I mean, that entire offense didn't look too good, and DeAndre Swift is going to be ranked this low until he shows that he can actually be productive. And then Javonte Williams as well. I mean, it was a 50-50 split between him and Jaleel McLaughlin. 50-50, actually, McLaughlin, I think, outcarried him in week 1. Do I think that's going to happen in week 2? I don't really know, but I'm not expecting Javonte to be a bell cow anytime soon. And then J.K. Dobbins, I do want to highlight here. I've got him a little bit higher than Avery does. I think the matchup is just too good to pass up when they're going against the Carolina Panthers, and Dobbins just showed that he can be productive. I mean, he's shown that he can be productive in past years, but after the Achilles tear, he comes back fully healthy and dominates week 1. And now he has a really friendly matchup against the Panthers, who just gave up 47 points in week 1. So obviously, I think Gus Edwards still has a chance to eat into that workload, which is why we don't have him a tier above this or anything like that. But he still is very volatile. But I still think that he could have a pretty good showing this week.
Let's talk about this G tier, because this is really this running back like 30 through 38 range, so that late running back 3 range is where we're starting to kind of sift through who's a pretender and who's not, and who's actually going to get volume this year. Yeah. Zamir White dropped down to this tier because in week 1, Alexander Mattison took away a lot of the receiving game from him. And so when Zamir White doesn't get a touchdown, his floor is extremely low. Yep. Ezekiel Elliott jumped up into this tier because he was the guy to own in Dallas, and we think that he's going to be the guy that gets the red zone carries there, and so that makes him, the running back to start in Dallas. Justice Hill jumped up because obviously Justice Hill got all the receiving work and Derrick Henry got none of it, and AA got 8 targets last week. Tajay kind of stayed the same for the most part. Devin Singletary dropped. It really was just Devin Singletary's bad.
The offense is
just bad. Eckler's still here. Chase Brown is still here. And then Tank Bigsby jumped into this tier because Tank Bigsby actually got 12 carries in week 1 for 73 yards. And so if he does end up scoring a touchdown or end up adding any receiving game to his game, I think you're going to see his production jump up. But again, these are guys that are going to be borderline flexible now as we get into the last tier here.
Yeah, the last tier doesn't have many surprises, again, outside of Alexander Mattison, which we touched on. I think he is going to be a viable flex option if you're desperate at running back and have to throw some player in there given injuries that we've already suffered from in week 1. He could get a decent amount of receiving work again. And then Chuba Hubbard is going to be a guy that drops into this tier as well. That offense for the Carolina Panthers, that team overall looked absolutely abysmal, and every single player in that offense is unstartable indefinitely until they can show that they can produce. Chuba, I have very, very low expectations for. Is disappointing, honestly, for a guy that was supposed to get bell cow work and usage. Doesn't matter with how horrible they were overall.
All right, there's our running back rankings for the week. Do us a huge favor. Make sure you drop a like and make sure you subscribe if you play fantasy football and if you enjoy these rankings. But let's go to wide receivers here. Let's start in the S tier here. It's going to be Tyreek Hill, and lo and behold, look who has made it back in the S tier in fantasy football week to week rankings.
Woo.
It's Cooper Kupp.
He's my wide receiver 1 for the week.
And I'll put it this way. If the roles were reversed and Cooper Kupp got hurt and was out on IR with a knee injury that was lingering, like last year, then Puka Nacua would be up here in the A tier probably. Cooper Kupp got 21 targets on Sunday. That's absurd.
That was vintage Cooper Kupp, man. And as long as he's on the field, I think you got to assume that that's what it's going to look like again.
And that's exactly what we're doing. I mean, in full point PPR leagues, he had 32 points last week. I mean, he is going to be a league winner if Puka Nacua ends up, being sidelined, being hobbled a little bit. 25 points in half PPR leagues, 21 targets, 14 receptions for 110 yards, and he had a touchdown.
Yeah.
that's significant. And so we're going to be putting him in the S tier probably as long as he continues to be the only guy there that's going to get that type of target volume with Puka Nacua out.
Yep.
So
we've got another extensive A tier here. I do want to highlight Mike Evans. We have ranked all the way up at wide receiver 5 overall for the week because honestly, can't not do it until Baker shows that he can't support Chris Godwin and Mike Evans. I mean, he demonstrated it week 1. Granted, it was a friendly matchup, but Mike Evans and his ability to just consistently produce year in and year out at 31, 32 years old, I mean, he's not going to stop, and I don't think he's going to stop in week 2. I think they're going to be, I think they're going to have a good week when their matchup is going to be against the Lions, who just gave up a decent amount of production to those wide receivers with the Rams as well. So I think Mike Evans is going to have a great week. I think a lot of people are projecting that as well. But Jeff, we moved down a couple spots. Even though he had that touchdown, outside of that touchdown, he kind of started a little bit slow, didn't get a ton of volume overall. I think that is obviously going to change, but right now we're going to be conservative with JJ for week 2.
Now dropping down to the B tier here, we'll start with Garrett Wilson, who kind of stays the same after. He still didn't score a touchdown, had 11 targets. We love to see that. We still got to see from some freaking touchdown upside from Garrett Wilson this year. Nico kind of stays in this tier we still have him as a top 12 wide receiver, and so do with that what you will. It is worth noting here that when Christian McCaffrey is out, Deebo Samuel is going to be ranked a little bit higher in our rankings. We have him here as the wide receiver 12, and this is mainly because while he got 9 targets yesterday and only caught 5, he only had 16.5 points. But with that being said, he did have 8 carries, and you're going to see him used like this while Christian McCaffrey's out. Mm-hmm. Now, if Christian McCaffrey does end up playing, I'm still going to be ranking Deebo in this tier most likely because Brandon Ayuk was kind of a no-show yesterday. Yes, he's being guarded by Sauce Gardner. We understand that, but he also didn't play in camp, and so he got off to a little bit of a slow start. With that being said, Deebo's a guy I think early in the season, we like how he's being used, and so he's going to be ranked pretty high in our. And if he has tons of touchdown upside as well, he didn't score a touchdown yesterday, I don't think. No, he did have a rushing touchdown, and so if he even scores, receiving touchdown there, you're talking about extremely high upside. So Jalen Waddle's also at the end of this tier, who had a pretty solid showing in week 1, even though he didn't, score a touchdown. So
yeah, and we're also going to have in this next tier, the C tier, at the top of the C tier, we are going to have Devontae Smith. And I really want to highlight Drake London, Ayuk, and Chris Godwin here, who we do have notably higher in our rankings than consensus. Drake London, I just think is going to bounce back from a rough week 1. I think the Falcons overall are going to bounce back from a rough week 1 and a terrible matchup. Brandon Ayuk, we do have still higher than consensus, even though he started slow week 1, right? We were kind of expecting that because he didn't practice all year, and he still got that red zone opportunity where he ended up dropping the ball, but we'd be having a different conversation if that game had gone differently. I think Brandon Ayuk is going to be just fine, and then Chris Godwin is going to be consistently underrated from a weekly production perspective. Expect him to have another good week, again, with another solid matchup where not only is Mike Evans going to produce, but I think Chris Godwin is going to be consistent and have a really high floor again.
Yeah, and then a smaller tier here, we're going to have Amari Cooper, Zay Flowers, and Stephon Diggs in this tier. And the reason is, these are guys that we're probably not starting over the guys in the C tier, but we're definitely starting them over the guys in the F tier, which we're going to have to do some splaining, I think, on the guys in the F tier. Some of the younger guys end up making their way in that tier. But obviously, Diggs had 2 touchdowns in week 1, a hot start to the season. That offense projects to be high scoring all year. Amari Cooper gets a little bit of a decrease here because Deshaun looked that bad. Mm-hmm. And we're really not sure what to expect out of Amari Cooper now. Ranking him as a wide receiver 2 here, low in wide receiver 2. We'll kind of see what he does the rest of the season and adjust from there.
Yeah, and he got a ton of targets in week 1, but he's got to haul him in. He only had 2 receptions on 9 targets. Probably a lot of those were uncatchable as well because Deshaun looked horrible. Yeah. We got a ton of rookies in this next tier because honestly, I think some of them have really good upside to jump this tier, and I think some of them are going to disappoint again. You've got Marv, you got Worthy, you got Ladd McConkey in this tier, and then you've got questionable guys like Tank Dell and Terry McLaurin and Calvin Ridley who even though they have positions and have avenues to be productive, you just don't really know what it's going to look like in week 2, given the matchup, given the situation in the passing game for Terry and Calvin Ridley specifically. And then for Tank Dell, is he going to be the third option again like he was in week 1? Or is he going to jump Stephon Diggs? Is he going to jump Nico Collins in week 2? We just need a bigger sample size in Houston to really be able to iron out what's going on there from a receiving perspective. But look, at the end of the day, I think a lot of these guys in the F tier, you're stuck starting anyways because you've got to flex all these guys given the investment and just the depth of a lot of your fantasy teams if you're in a 12 team.
So let's jump down to the G tier here. And Malik Neighbors is at the top of this tier. And we need to probably talk about this pretty big discrepancy in our rankings.
You got a big discrepancy here.
A huge one. So I have Malik Neighbors ranked back-to-back with Marvin Harrison Jr. I have them 26 and 28, essentially. And this is because I think they both have the same outlook. They're both, young guys. Malik Neighbors actually produced more in week 1. And so I have Malik Neighbors ranked over Marvin Harrison Jr. by 2 spots. And the reason in our consensus rankings they're down here is because you have Malik Neighbors at 41 and you have Marvin Harrison Jr. at 23. So you should probably explain your thought process on that because it brings him down a whole tier in our rankings.
Yeah, so some of it is just the week 2 outlook in general. I think Arizona has the Rams, which again, I like that from a production perspective for Marv. Yes, Neighbors is matching up against the Commanders in week 2, but Daniel Jones looks so bad. I literally don't trust anything in New York. I trust Kyler Murray 10 times over trusting Daniel Jones to be able to get the ball to Neighbors consistently. And while Neighbors got the volume to be productive in week 1, it wasn't enough where I'm like excited and think that he has a ton of upside in week 2, especially when with Marv, he started slow. Again, I just don't realistically see him getting less than what Neighbors is getting in week 2. I could be way out of line, but I'm also looking at all the other rookies here who did produce in week 1 that I just think are going to outproduce Malik Neighbors. Brian Thomas Jr. I have ranked over Neighbors. Worthy already did it. I have him ranked over Neighbors this week. Lad McConkey has a phenomenal matchup against the Panthers. I have him ranked over Worthy this week. Even Keon Coleman, who I think could do some damage in this matchup against the Dolphins on Thursday night. So again, this is kind of up to you. We're concerned about Neighbors week 2 for sure, but I understand why you want him back-to-back with Marv.
Yeah, so I have him as a high-end wide receiver 3, and so make your own decision there. At the beginning of the season, we're trying to sort out these rookies, and we really don't know yet. But in terms of the rest of this tier, you've got Kirk and Thomas in this tier. Obviously, Thomas out-snapping Kirk. But with that being said, Thomas did have a touchdown in week 1, and without the touchdown, he would have been pretty ineffective. So from a fantasy perspective, at least. So be careful there. George Pickens has another tough matchup this week, and I have people kind of trying to victory lap on us, like, oh, George Pickens, he had a 33% target share, blah, blah. I'm like, he had 10 points.
Yeah.
So, and I don't know where that finished in week 1, but I will say this, with George Pickens, he did have 2 long passes last week, and that kind of propped up his 10-point game. It's really not saying much. I still want to rank George Pickens here until he shows me he's going to be a dominant wide receiver in that offense. Is going to score consistent fantasy points, and then I'll move him up a couple tiers here.
Yeah.
JSN, we moved down quite a bit because, again, 2 targets for JSN, 19 yards. I don't know what else to say. This is honestly probably too high for him. Nathan has him ranked at 28. I have him ranked at 45. And so I've adjusted a lot more.
That's pretty funny.
I know we have a pretty significant difference there. So there are some. You can definitely tell we have got some disagreements in our rankings this week. But Keenan Allen is the guy we both
not
had.
Too many though. It's not bad.
No, not too many. But the ones we do disagree on, we really disagree on. They're all young guys too. Keenan Allen, we've got ranked in the 37 to 40 range. And really, with Keenan, he got 11 targets. He still wasn't really fantasy productive. He had 5 points last week. Yeah. And so be kind of careful with that. JMO, Keon Coleman, and those guys wrap up this tier. And I think JMO, obviously, we told you to start him in week 1. He was a good start. Keon, I think, is going to be probably a solid start. Unless Jalen Ramsey's on him, and then maybe it's going to be Khalil Shakir instead. But Khalil Shakir's in the next tier.
Yeah, so Khalil Shakir, again, another guy that we can note here. I think we think that Keon Coleman can be productive in a Miami game. I think Khalil Shakir can as well. We do have Tyler Lockett considerably higher than consensus, 19 spots higher than what Sleeper, I believe, is projecting him at from a production perspective. I mean, he got the most targets at the wide receiver position again. Like, Lockett just won't go away. It's really annoying for DK and JSN, but we got to rank him here. Maybe his upside is limited. I understand that, but again, you can't ignore what Tyler Lockett is consistently able to do in that offense from one regime to another. So he really is going to be the biggest storyline here. And then Brandon Cooks as well. Got that touchdown, had some solid production week 1. He is going to be very touchdown dependent, but again, he's the second option behind CeeDee Lamb. And now that Ferguson is down, I think you're looking at Brandon Cooks being moved up boards quite a bit because he is the true second option there. And they're going to have to lean on those 2 guys in CeeDee and Cooks.
And let's wrap up here with our QB and tight end rankings. Let's start with QB. All these guys in the S tier have rushing upside. They all did pretty well in week one. I mean, Anthony Richardson had 27 points on 9 completions. So as long as he's doing that, he's going to be in S tier with the rest of these guys.
Yeah. And then A tier, we're going to have all those pass-happy quarterbacks with a couple rushing guys, too, that are still young and inexperienced. I know Jaden Daniels, a lot of people are going to be aggressive with Jaden Daniels week 2 and say that he's going to be amazing. He's going to do really well. He's playing the Giants. Yes, I understand that. He did get 2 garbage time rushing touchdowns. So I think a lot of what Washington was doing offensively towards the end of the game was not really what you're going to see in what is likely a more competitive game between 2 really sucky football teams. So we'll see what Daniels does this week, but you got to have him in the A tier because the rushing upside alongside Mahomes, Stroud, Tua, and Kyler.
In the B tier here, we're going to have the guys who really didn't play as well as we thought they would last week in Stafford and Goff. We both moved Baker up quite a bit. Nathan has him at 14. I have him at 10. And so with
it's
that being
a big
said,
tier. Like I have no issue with that at all.
Baker is somebody that I'm a little bit higher on now after seeing him in week 1. And I mean, after seeing him all last year and then continue that without Dave Canales, I'm pretty encouraged with that. And then Dak and Purdy, obviously both in good offenses, is going to be here as well.
Yep. And then the C tier, we're going to have Herbert, Burrow, and Lawrence. I think this is a small tier because they're all very talented quarterbacks. You know exactly what they are as NFL players. And sometimes the production comes and follows that. Sometimes it doesn't, depending on matchup, depending on situation. Joe Burrow always starts slow. He's going to be this low until they start to pick it up. Cincinnati always starts the year slow, the first month slow. Justin Herbert, still trying to figure out that offense. And then Lawrence, same thing, honestly, but I do like his connection with Brian Thomas Jr. and the upside that could be there as well.
Kirk Cousins started slow. Caleb Williams started slow. Geno Smith was, okay because he had the rushing touchdown, but outside of that, I was like, Aaron Rodgers started slow. All these guys.
But they're all solid quarterbacks, so that's why they're going to be ahead of Justin Fields, Carr, and Levis in the F tier, and all of these guys, again, are starting quarterbacks, but you're not expecting much from them. Justin Fields, he has the rushing upside, but he didn't do anything. He's still as bad. So I would say the one guy I want to highlight here is Bo Nix. He had 41 passing attempts last week and demonstrated a little rushing upside as well. So he could find himself moving up a couple tiers here if they can start being a little more consistent and getting a little more production in the next couple of weeks.
Tight ends now. Let's go to tight ends. Sam Laporta, Travis Kelce, and Trey McBride. Obviously, Kelce had a slow week. Laporta didn't really have a great week. McBride was okay. All these guys, we're going to continue to rank these tight ends kind of how they project rest of the season until they really show us. I mean, there's so much parity with.
I think next to likely Trey McBride had the most targets at the tight end position in week 1. He had 9 targets.
How many did Parkinson end up having?
He had 6, I believe.
Okay. Yeah.
He may have had 8, but it was pretty good. Kyle Pitts has solidified himself in the A tier. I think his connection with Kirk Cousins was fun to see. I think Drake London's going to follow as well, but you got to rank him here in this tier consistently until he shows that he doesn't deserve to be. And honestly, there weren't many tight ends in week 1 that were deserving to be in the A tier, so it is going to be pretty small this week with Kittle, Pitts, and Kincaid.
Mark Andrews obviously jumps down a tier. Isaiah likely jumps up a couple tiers. They'll both be in this tier. Evan Ingram is also in this tier with them. In terms of who do I start from the Ravens tight end room, I mean, if you have both of them, I still lean Mark Andrews for this week, obviously. But with that being said, if you have likely and you don't have Andrews, I'm definitely comfortable starting him over most guys. He's our tight end 9 on the week. And then Brock Bowers in this tier as well. Good NFL debut for Brock Bowers, and I expect him to kind of build on that.
Yep, Goddard and Parkinson, we've got at the top here back-to-back. We have moved up Parkinson big time, not just because we're Parkinson fans and called him as a sleeper before the season started, but because Puka Nacua is now down, and I think Colby Parkinson could be the biggest winner from that next to Cooper Kupp, obviously. But we've seen in the past that Matt Stafford is not afraid to get the ball to his tight ends. Parkinson has shown that he's capable of taking that volume week 1, the first week in that new offense for him. I'm super excited to see what Parkinson's able to do. Avery moved him up even higher than I did. Avery moved him up over Isaiah Likely and Brock Bowers, which shows you how highly we would think of Parkinson in his situation now. I think I'm really not far behind from there either. So expect a big week from Parkinson, and Goddard showed that he can take on some decent volume even when A.J. Brown's productive, and Devonta Smith and Saquon Barkley. I think a lot of that is because Jalen Hurts wasn't running the ball as much as he has in previous years because they have Saquon Barkley now. So keep an eye on that for sure. Goddard is definitely serviceable, and you're very comfortable starting him.
And then the last 2 tiers here, again, we'll just throw these up for you. You're probably not starting these guys unless you're in like super deep leagues or something like that. And again, all of these guys, Mike Gesicki had a good catch in week 1. So there you go. Our complete rankings for this week. Do us a huge favor, drop a like, and make sure you subscribe to the channel if you play fantasy football. Head over to flockfantasy.com/domain to get a team blueprint. We'll review your team for you. We appreciate you guys. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you later.